Well, good morning, everybody. Today is the last day of our series called Shaped by God. For the last few weeks, we've been digging in a little deeper into this whole idea that God has a plan for your life. Now, most of us know that God has a plan for His church. It's a big picture plan that's pretty much the same for all of us, but how He accomplishes that plan in us can look very different for each of us individually. You see, in addition to the broad brush purpose that God has for every person that's invited Jesus Christ to be Lord of their life, He also has a specific purpose for each individual. It's a deeply personal purpose, and it's a role that He's been preparing us for all of our lives. And so, over the last few weeks, we've been talking about some of the ways that God has been preparing each of us for that very personal purpose that He has for us. We've been talking about how we've been shaped by God. So as we round this last corner in the series, let's take a second just to recap a little bit, to make sure that we're all on the same page and understand the main points of the series. If you'll remember, I said that God's plan for you involves much more than just any one thing. God's plan for you involves the spiritual gifts that He gives every believer. It involves the heart we have, or passions that He's placed in us. It involves the abilities that each of us has and have been developing all of our lives. It involves the individual, specific, and unique personalities that each of us has. And it also involves the experiences of our lives that have helped make us who we are today. It has been my hope for this series that by the end of it, we would all very simply just have a bit of a better understanding of how we've been shaped by God for ministry. And for this last message, today we're going to talk about two things: our personalities and our experiences. Now, the reason why we're covering two bases today is because there really isn't a whole lot more we can say about how our personalities impact our purpose that we haven't already said about both our heart and our abilities. Because our personality is really deeply tied to the passions of our heart, and is often built up over the course of our lives around the things that we're good at. So, it can also be said of our personalities that they too can be used by us for good or for evil. And it's our choice whether or not we use them for the purposes God has for us. There is one thing, however, that I would like to point out about why our personalities should be carefully considered when working to discover our purpose. And for that, I actually have a little experiment for you to try out at home. For this, you're going to need a pen or pencil and a piece of scrap paper of some kind. So you can go ahead, pause the video. That's why it's nice to have video. Pause the video so that you can grab those items now. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. First, making sure that you leave enough room to do this a second time on the same page, I'd like you to write your name. Now, once you've done that, I want you to switch hands and write your name again using your opposite hand. Did you notice anything about that? I'm guessing that, like most people who aren't ambidextrous, when you tried to do the same task in a way that wasn't natural to you, three things happened. One, you felt uncomfortable doing it. Two, you took a little bit of extra time and effort to accomplish it. And three, you probably still did a lousy job, like I did when I tried it. Now, I got the idea originally for this experiment years ago from Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Model for Discipleship. And in it, he pointed out that the same three things tend to be true when we try to minister in areas that are not suited to our personalities. God has wired your temperament in a unique way. And this factor is very important in matching you to the right ministry. Keep in mind, God did not use a cookie cutter when He created us. He doesn't want us all exactly the same. He made each of us unique on purpose. He loves variety, and there is no right or wrong temperament. We need opposites to balance the church. So, just like you would if you were filling out one of those personality profile tools, when you think about your temperament, consider where on the spectrum you might fall when you think through the main elements of personality. What I mean by that is, are you extroverted or are you introverted? Are you a thinker or are you a feeler? Do you prefer routine or variety? Do you see yourself as self-controlled or self-expressive? Are you cooperative by nature or competitive? I encourage you to think these things through because any one of these personality elements can greatly affect your success in any particular ministry. For example, if you're highly introverted, then leading a youth group that requires an extreme level of energy and constant engagement of dozens of teenagers is probably going to burn you out completely. If you're someone who needs a lot of routine in your life, then leading an outreach ministry where spontaneity and being able to shift gears quickly throughout the calendar year may not be well suited to your personality. If you're someone who's quite a bit more self-expressive than self-controlled, then leading a small home group or a Bible study or something will be significantly more challenging to do well, given that your role is about facilitating discussion among others in your group and not necessarily doing all the talking yourself. Sounds like I'm speaking from experience, huh? Well, and finally, if you're someone who is competitive by nature, it probably wouldn't be a good fit for you to be leading teams of people because the nature of that kind of ministry requires a temperament of cooperation. So think about your temperament and consider where on the spectrum of each of those you fall when you think through each of the main elements of personality. I mean, knowing who you are is only going to help you know what you're meant to do. Plain and simple. Anyway, that's enough about personality. Let's talk about experiences. Now, as we get into the subject of experiences and how those experiences are used by God to shape us for ministry, I think that although there are many things we could consider, I believe it's important that we focus on the few things that are most relevant to how our experiences relate to their being used in ministry. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about those things. Thing one, whatever we have gone through, no matter what it is, God's intention for us in those experiences are that they result in good. Let me say that one more time. Thing one, whatever we have gone through, no matter what it is, God's intention for us in those experiences are that they result in good. Let me put it another way. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." What that means is that no matter what you've gone through, God wants to make good come out of it. Now, I remember about 15 years ago, a couple came to our church to tell their story as a part of a heart healing ministry that they lead. And I still remember it because, quite frankly, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to forget it. It was one of the most shocking and painful stories I've ever personally heard someone tell. They spoke about how, while on vacation many years earlier, they were in a terrible car accident, and all of their children were killed. Now, as a father, listening to their story, I was absolutely overwhelmed. I couldn't imagine what that must have been like for them. Just listening to them, I felt like someone had plunged a dagger of ice into my chest. And I remember thinking, how would you ever come back from something like that? But that's the thing. They did come back from that. They walked with God through every bit of it, and he brought healing to their hearts. And once they had healing in their hearts, he then called them to help others receive the same healing in their hearts. You see, not only did God take an incredibly tragic event and bring good out of it, to this very day he continues to bring good out of their story by using it to heal others. The same is true of all of our circumstances. Now, you may not be able to see it right away sometimes. I mean, pain is like that. It's sometimes hard to see through it. But God intends for good to come out of all of your experiences. Like Romans 8:28 says, we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So remember thing one, no matter what you've gone through, God wants to make good come out of it. Okay? Thing two, God will sometimes have us go through difficult circumstances so that we can learn, grow, and be transformed for the better. In 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7, the Apostle Paul wrote, "To keep me from becoming conceited because of these great revelations, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan, to torment me." Now, what this means for us is that sometimes the challenging circumstances that we face are meant to help us be better, stronger, and more able to fulfill our purpose in ministry. They will still hurt. They will still be hard, but just as thing one tells us that God means for good to come from it, thing two takes it one step further by reminding us that the good he wants to come out of it may actually be for us. You know, in a funny way, I think we all kind of instinctively know this principle. That's why I'm sure that parents all over the world have at one time or another used the expression, "Well, you're not going to do that again, are you?" You know what I mean? No? Well, maybe this will help. See, a long, long time ago when I was still pretty young, my friend Matthew and I were goofing off with a bunch of tools and junk in his garage. And he had this power cord thing that had a whole bunch of plug-ins on one end, and it was kind of busted a bit. So when you plugged it in and squeezed the sides of it together, it made this really cool buzzing sound, kind of like a laser gun or something. And what kind of kid doesn't like a crazy power cable laser gun thing? So we kept playing with it, plugging it in and pretending to shoot each other and all that kind of stuff. Sounds like fun, right? Well, we thought it was. That is, until all of a sudden it wasn't. The last time I went to plug it in, I wasn't paying much attention to what I was doing, and the loose skin between my thumb and index finger got caught by one of the prongs on the plug, and wham! Current flowed through my body like a bolt of lightning through a tree. I almost got electrocuted. But here's the thing. I'm sure both of our parents told us a bazillion times never to stick anything into an outlet. I know mine sure did. But when they found out what had happened, I remember my mom saying something like, "Well, you're never going to do that again, are you?" She was right. Because she knew as well as we do that sometimes the tough stuff that we got to go through is meant to teach us something or make us better in some way. My experience with the extension cord might have been a little scary, and it certainly hurt, but ultimately it taught me a valuable lesson that I'll never forget. And I'm better for it. Now, that might be an overly simplified illustration, but the principle remains true. Sometimes we have to go through difficult circumstances so that we can learn, grow, and be transformed for the better. And that means that sometimes the challenging circumstances that we face are meant to help us be better, stronger, and more able to fulfill our purpose in ministry. Make sense? Good. We also have a thing three. And thing three is this. God wants to use your experiences to fulfill the purpose he has for you. Let me say that again. God wants to use your experiences to fulfill the purpose he has for you. Listen to what Paul wrote in his second letter to the Corinthian church. God wonderfully comforts and strengthens us in our hardships and trials. And why does he do this? So that when others are troubled, needing our sympathy and encouragement, we can pass on to them the same help and comfort God has given us. That's 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4. We even see that, writing from prison, the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Philippi, and he told them, "And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that's happened to me here has helped to spread the good news." What all this means for us is that when it comes to our experiences, it isn't just our education or training that helps us fulfill our purpose in ministry. It's everything we've been through. Now, as a pastor who is also a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, I get asked all the time, if I could go back and do it again, would I do it differently? And that has always been an easy question for me to answer. No, I wouldn't change a thing. And the reason I wouldn't change anything is because of what God has done with my past and what I am able to do with it now. You see, because I experienced things that the average person hasn't, I'm now able to relate to some people that others have a greater difficulty in connecting with. I've ministered to heroin addicts and street kids and homeless people of all kinds, not just because I care about them, but because my story now helps me to be able to relate to their story. In this life, when we give it over to God, nothing is wasted. God will use any and all of your experiences to fulfill the purposes He has for you. That's why, as we're searching to discover what ministry we should be a part of, we should be considering all the major experiences of our lives. These four in particular. Our spiritual experiences. These are the meaningful decisions or specific times that we've had with God. Our painful experiences, which are the problems, the hurts, and the trials that we've overcome. Our educational experiences, which are more than just what we learned in school. It is worth thinking through what your favorite subjects in school were, but what we're talking about here is a lot more than just school. So we should be considering all the educational experiences where we picked up tools for life. It's like what Rick Warren once said. One of the most overlooked factors in determining the ministry God has for me is my past experience, particularly my hurts and problems I've overcome with God's help. Since our greatest life messages come out of our weaknesses and not our strengths, we should pay close attention to what we've learned in the school of hard knocks. So, spiritual experiences, painful experiences, educational experiences, and finally our ministry experiences. If you've ever had any, if you've ever served in the church before in any capacity, you should definitely consider how that went and how you feel about it. Was it a successful ministry? Did you feel fulfilled in it? Were you encouraged by the experience? Or did it help you realize that you should be trying something else? Now, that is about it for this series on how we're shaped by God for ministry. And I hope you'll remember what we talked about. That God has a plan for you, and that plan involves the spiritual gifts He gives every believer. It involves the heart that we have, those passions that He's placed in us. It involves the abilities that each of us has and have been developing all of our lives. And it involves our individual, specific, and unique personalities, as well as the experiences of our lives that have helped make us who we are today. Now, before we go, I've been asked many times already about whether or not we could do more about all of this. And the quick answer is yes. We'll have to wait a little bit until we're able to meet in slightly larger groups, at least more than 5, right? But when we get there, the plan is to have classes available for those who might be interested in diving in a little deeper into how we're shaped by God for ministry. So I'll let you know as the day approaches. Next week, we're beginning a series called One-on-One with Jesus, where we're going to be talking about some really cool moments in the Bible where people connected personally with Jesus and some of the incredible things that happened as a result. So I hope you join us for that, beginning next Sunday. Until then, blessings on you all.